Sound matters. Be heard. Welcome to the podcast where you get exclusive behind-the-scenes tips to make your own show sound truly spectacular. This is Podtastic Audio.
Hey, what's happening? How are you doing today? How is your podcast coming along? I am Chris, and I am from the Chris and Christine Show podcast. And you can find out every single thing you want to know about that show at chrisandchristineshow.com. And I'll put a link to that, don't you worry, into the show notes of this episode. So here on Podtastic Audio is where I help you design an amazing podcast without having to spend amazing amounts of cash, like this brand new podcast intro I just created. Now, this intro I did entirely myself, except from the old voiceover work which I had stored on the old computer. This is why it's probably important to save every single thing you do with your podcast, whether it's creating the intro or anything really, episode stuff, guest interviews. I save everything. I save the original files of pretty much everything. It's all WAV files for the most part, but I save everything and I put it onto my backup hard drive, which can get filled up pretty quickly, especially if you're doing a lot of video work. 4K video and all that high-def video can really take up your hard drive space very fast. And my MacBook doesn't quite have the largest hard drive space in it, so I have to put everything on a backup hard drive. So today on Podtastic Audio, I have a fantastic VIP guest stopping by the studio today, talking all about podcasting, podcast marketing, and how to make sure your show sounds amazing. Let's get a great podcast for 2023. Let's do this. So before we get into all that fun stuff, I want to say is that last night, I discovered a brand new television miniseries on Netflix. Well, it's new to me because I just discovered it. And that's the whole point, is that if you have your podcast out there, you've been doing it for a while now, and somebody just discovers the podcast of your podcast, don't you worry. As long as your content is good, as long as it sounds good, and is somewhat evergreen, for the most part anyways, then people are willing to listen to it and to share it and discover it. Just because you did a podcast episode, say, a year or two ago, does not mean that somebody will never, ever play it again. If you look at your stats, I'm sure there are lots of episodes in your back catalog that still get downloaded and plays. Every play counts and every episode counts. Don't think of your show as like this live television performance where it's just one and done. No, it lives in your back catalog and people can go back there and discover it. If you want to know what show I'm talking about on Netflix, it is the Love, Death, and Robots show. It came out in 2019, and this show is quite amazing. It's let's just say it's not for kids. It's a very mature audiences only for this television series. It's like a cartoon animation. They've got some live action in there too. But the cool thing is that each episode is its own thing. It's its own story. It's very good storytelling. But it's very gross. There's a lot of dark humor and there's a lot of adult content, let's just say, in that stuff. But I just discovered it randomly yesterday. And then I sat for 2 hours, watching every episode I could find on Netflix. But I might watch more later today as we go on here. But I'm just saying that you just never know when somebody could discover your show and might like it and share it and talk all about it. Which is why it's so important to make sure that every single episode you do is gold. I mean, make sure it's the best thing you can put out there. Put all of your energy and effort you can into making sure that each episode is amazing. And I know, if you got to deal with what you got, if you have a guest that has horrible audio or your equipment crapped out or whatever. Whatever. There's a million things that can go wrong creating a podcast. But make sure that you put your heart and soul into creating a fantastic episode each week or however you do it, and make sure that each episode that you do, the new ones, are better than the last one. Basically any podcast out there can always use improvement. So today we are joined by a fantastic podcast editor He owns his own podcast editing company. We're talking about Zack, the podcast man himself. He is stopping by the studio to talk all about podcasting and how to make sure your show sounds amazing. We're talking about his business, what he does for clients, and some tips and tricks on how to make sure your podcast sounds amazing like it always should. So let's bring him on out here. Here is Zack, the podcast man.
Hey, I am doing great, Chris. Thank you so much for having me, Mr. Podtastic.
Thanks, man. Hey, it turns out I just found out we are actually neighbors, man. We're in the same city.
Yeah, at least the same county. We're drivable, so hey, if I'm running into any technical issues, I'm just going to be knocking on your door, I believe, because I think you got that down, man.
Yeah, well, yeah, sure, why not? More the merrier. Come on over, we got, it's a party going on over here right now, Podtastic Audio. So, Zack, you got into podcasting when?
Ooh, good question. I got into podcasting when it wasn't even cool yet.
So you're talking like, is this before the 2010, before 20, back in the 2005, 2006 days?
Not that long ago. It was, so not a dinosaur, just an old man, I guess. I started editing, started on Fiverr. I got my first couple clients just on Fiverr.com. I was editing episodes for $5 a pop when I started. Don't do that.
Why not? What's wrong with Fiverr's $5 special?
Well, hey, if the episode's 1 minute long, then we'll be okay with it. But
right.
But
okay.
What year was that? That was, I should probably have my story down. You might think I'm making it up by now, but
okay.
It was,
you should be surprised. People make up stuff right here.
It was about 2015, 2016. My oldest client is still with me. I'll give her a shout out. Boss Girl Creative.
Nice.
402 episodes now. Never missed a week.
Is it always weekly?
And it is always weekly. Yeah. I mean, editing her podcast is one of the most consistent things I've done over the last 8 years. Honestly, every week.
Wow. So you edit podcasts, but you also do you help people figure out what they're going to podcast about?
Yeah. So in 2020, the podcast baby was born. It's now the podcast man, but it was born as the podcast baby.
Wait a second. Time out. Hold the press. You went from the podcast baby. You didn't go to the podcast guy, then the podcast man? You just graduated. You went up and over, huh?
Oh, no. He had to grow, man. He was the podcast baby, the podcast boy, the podcast guy, the podcast dude. And he has graduated to the podcast man, but he was born in 2020.
Oh, we'll check you out. The podcast man, 2020. So the podcast man, so you basically are a full, so what did you do over there with editing? I mean, what's your whole package?
Yeah. So good question. So as you mentioned, it did kind of change from strictly podcast editing into more of an inclusive agency. And that was because when the pandemic hit, as a musician, my gigs went out the window. I went from playing 2 or 3 gigs a day to 0 gigs a day. So I said, what else am I good at? And it was podcast editing, which I was doing some of on the side. But then I said, okay, let's make this into more of an all-inclusive agency, which also includes helping clients launch their podcasts. So some of the strategy behind it in the pre-launch phase. Obviously, a lot of the stuff that we both do, Chris, as well, like making sure that they're going to sound good, making sure they have the right equipment, they're all set to go, recording techniques, mic technique, the room they record in, so much that's important that factors into the actual sound of the audio. And then, the other things that are included in podcasting, show notes, transcriptions, helping analyze the statistics, and helping with the short form videos more now too, as part of my offerings.
Okay. Yeah. So when you do your podcast editing, is it mostly only with audio, or do you deal with video at all?
Yeah. So much, is getting into video. It's like the number one question I'm getting from my clients these days. Like, hey, how can I get onto Spotify? I want my video to be on there too. I'm like, well, we're going to have to maybe switch you over to Anchor as the host. And really with my clients, I push for them to, if they're going to get into video, really use the short form video clips.
Okay, right.
Yeah, instead of, I mean, it can be beneficial to put up the full episode, on YouTube or on Anchor, but it's really like, unless you are in a super sexy studio, you have something that's very visually appealing, and you have maybe a very animated way of being a podcast host, and you have some very interesting guests, and I don't know, you get some weird stuff going on like Joe Rogan, where it's maybe kind of interesting to look at the video, but unless it's really visually appealing, I would really stick with audio. And I don't know, maybe we're we're probably driving in the same lane, Chris, because we're pretty audio oriented guys, I believe. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, I can do video. I have the ability to do video. It's not I wouldn't say good video, because I have like a generic like Costco brand webcam and some generic ring lights in this room here. The only reason why I have them is because just in case somebody says, hey, we're doing a Zoom thing or we're doing whatever, and I'm a guest. Yeah, okay, I'm ready for that. But it's not my main focus. I do audio and audio only. The only video stuff I've ever used to, I used to do a lot of GoPro like videos and like action videos, those kind of things. And of course, those require you to be outside this room here doing stuff, physically doing stuff. And that's the kind of videos that I would take, those kind of videos that I would edit, and those are the kind of videos that I like to watch versus the talking head videos. Like, I think as far as the podcast goes, where video really helps, like you said, it's got to be with the short form, just really quick little clip kind of content, nothing long term.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a big part of the predictions in the industry, right, for 2023. And I think it's great. You can repurpose one podcast episode into so many pieces of content between video and images and carousel posts. And some people would say that audiograms are dead. I don't know.
I know. I've been slacking off on mine. I should do one every single week. I've been slacking off on them. I'm sorry. I'll get right back on it. But I love the audiograms. I mean, I used to listen to a lot of them, mostly because I was like, what does their show sound like? I'm not going to listen to their show, but I'll listen to their audiogram. And if their audiogram is garbage, I'm like, oh, well, I guess their show sounds like crap too. I think if you're doing audiogram, I always say put out the best stuff in the audiogram, like the very best stuff of the show, because that'll get them hooked, and then get them, hopefully lead them to the show. Have you seen much of a conversion rate with audiograms to listener of a podcast?
Yeah, that's a good point, and I agree with you. I don't think audiograms are dead, but I do think it's a good idea to mix up the format. Maybe some audiograms, maybe some short form videos, and hey, even Instagram is saying images are back, baby, supposedly. How they've been pushing Reels so hard, but supposedly images are back and carousels are back. So, but to answer your question, I have seen some of my clients who use audiograms, they'll gain followers from it. And with my clients, they all have podcasts with the end goal of really pushing more leads to their business.
Right. Yeah.
Or, more people to purchase their products, but mostly it's more leads to their business, the services they provide, coaching, that type of thing. And so the podcast isn't even necessarily isn't the end goal. It's just part of the funnel, right? So in that case, I've had some clients who have reported that the audiograms will get more people kind of into their world, if you will. They'll start following them. Maybe that'll be their way into the funnel, if you want to talk like, I don't know if that, to me, that sounds sometimes a little cold, like get into my sales funnel, but
yeah,
but it gets them kind of into the universe of that entrepreneur, right?
Right. Yeah, that's what I always hear. One thing I do hear a lot is that you don't make money with your podcast; you make money from your podcast.
Oh yeah, I love that. I've never heard it said that way, but that perfectly said. And there's even some of my clients who, they'll have their short form videos that are just like you said, they're gold nuggets pulled from the episodes, right? and audiograms and these types of shorter form posts. And in some cases, the user who, consumes this content will maybe end up buying the course from that entrepreneur or end up booking a call and becoming a coaching client or something like that. And they didn't actually end up going to listen to the podcast at all, but they did get hooked in from the short form content that was pulled from the podcast episode. So just like you said, I couldn't agree with you more, and very beautifully said too, my friend.
Well, thank you. Wasn't all me, but I had to find it from somewhere. But yeah, because a lot of these people out here, I don't know if you've seen this with your clients, is like, I got an episode out. I'm on episode 10. Ooh, 10 episodes in, dude. I want to make some cash right now. I want my podcast. We should be running ads. We should be making some money with this thing. What do you tell those guys?
Well, shoot for the stars. And what I tell them, the dreamer side of me says, like, hey, anything is possible. Let's keep growing this podcast. Let's get it to 10 million downloads, but then the business side of me says, you know what? I would focus more on promoting your own products and services rather than looking to get third-party ads on your podcast. Because if you're getting those third-party ads on your podcast from other businesses or like Podcorn or one of these I think even Anchor or Buzzsprout, I think the hosts now also you can sign up to get the ads rolling and stuff.
Yeah,
but
don't they give you like cheaper hosting or something like that if you get ads in your show? I heard something like that.
Oh, some of them, I have heard something like that. That might be the best deal you get because the actual payout you get from the ads is kind of like pennies on the dollar unless you have a ton of downloads and listens, right? So it's kind of one of those things where my clients, most of them will promote their own products and services.
Okay,
and
that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, and that they'll get one client every month or every other month, and that'll exceed the return on investment for their podcast. So these are kind of like higher ticket clients where it's definitely quality over quantity as far as the return on investment with their podcast for sure.
So what kind of podcasts do you usually get coming to you for editing? Are they a lot of like Zoom calls or what?
Yeah, good question. It is a lot of Zoom, I think that's just kind of the standard and everybody knows how to do it and it keeps it simple. And being a pod nerd on the audio side of things myself, I say, hey, just imagine if they would all do like double ender recordings and record locally.
Don't ask them to do that. They will screw that up in a heartbeat,
I actually removed that from my audio recording guide because I was like, oh geez, this is just some of the hosts can kind of figure it out, but then to ask the guests to do that, it just kind of flusters them. And now if they were using something like Clean Feed, then we'd be talking, right?
Right. Well, I like using it because I've met the guys on Clean Feed. I met the owners, the creators of Clean Feed a few times. And when I first got involved with Clean Feed was because I was looking for a better solution to record guests or do even like a remote show because Christina and I were doing the podcast and she was traveling for work or for personal. She was traveling a lot. I was like, yeah, she's got to be a better way to still do a show because we used the Zoom thing too before. This is about before the pandemic happened. So we tried it and I was like, yeah, it's okay, but how do I record it and how do I figure it out? And I got the audio. It didn't quite. It sounded a little more filtered sound to it, and I was like, I don't know if I like that sound. And I just Googled and it said Clean Feed had like a free version, check it out for free. I'm okay. And then I just looked up a podcast that had one of the guys from Clean Feed on it. I listened to that show. They did the whole thing through Clean Feed. And I was like blown away. I was like, no way. That one guy was in Miami. The other guy was in London. And I'm like, there's no way that was all done on like that. I'm like, no way. So then I checked it out. Christine and I did a few test runs with it, just like room to room, kind of thing, computer to computer. And I was looking at the audio, listening to the audio. I was like, there's no way. There's no filter sound or nothing. It sounds great. Then we did a few test episodes that way. I was like, I think we can have guests on here. Like we just kind of built it from there. And we're on the pro plan now because we've had some guests come in. And with the free plan, everybody has to have headphones. Everybody has to have a good microphone. If you don't have that, because you get a lot of guests that don't have that, then you have to figure something out, and that's why we upgraded to the Pro plan. And I've been a customer of theirs ever since. Since the early days of 2020.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, that's really the closest thing that you get, pretty much, to a double ender anyway, right? And Riverside and Squadcast, when they work well, they sound great, but and I'm definitely not throwing them under the bus, because this could be user error on the end of my clients.
Okay.
And I'm not throwing my clients under the bus either, because sometimes things can get confusing. So just to cover my own butt here, but I just get some issues with delay or echo or weird stuff going on, distortion.
Do you get audio drifts too?
Some audio drift sometimes, and it's funny because Zoom, I haven't had any issues with any of the things I just said for at least 2+ years with my clients.
Okay,
but I'm not getting the same quality audio, so it's kind of like pick your poison, right?
Right, definitely. No matter what you do, there's always a problem. There's always some issue with something, no matter what. I mean, with Clean Feed here, it does glitch out from time to time. That's all internet issue type stuff. Yeah, but I like the fact that I can get the files like instantaneously, and it's very quick. There's no cloud to go chase the files. The files are already here. Like what you said so far, I already have it. So it's already saved. So it's already here. So it's something about being quick. In my busy schedule, my busy life, I don't have time to wait around for files to get sent to me. I don't have time to be downloading from the cloud or whatever. And I said, I've heard stories too from the Zencaster. I think Zencaster does kind of the same thing. They do like a cloud sharing, and then you download the whole thing back to you. That's probably how most of them work these days. It's like a virtual double ender, so to speak.
Yep.
So, but Zoom, Zoom's okay. I think Zoom will get the job done for most clients these days. But you don't edit the video part, just the audio part, right?
Yeah, so look at us. We got all excited and got into the audio quality stuff, and you're bringing it back full circle, Chris. I like that.
Well, that's what I do best, man.
Yep, just got to keep us on track here. So the video part of it, I do offer an add-on that basically will boil down the episode into the client can pick how many short clips, but usually it's one per episode, and we just figure out we scan through, find the most salient, beautiful golden nugget from the episode, and basically cook that bad boy down into the perfect format that works with all the main social media, and of course in portrait format. We haven't seen landscape for a while, except for when people just pop those straight from Zoom over, which I still was doing, but I'm fixing that too. But that's neither here nor there. But
okay, yeah.
But anyway, just getting these clips formatted nicely, so the client doesn't have to worry about like, oh, what's the formatting? How can I move this? Get it into portrait, and where can I put the subtitles on and all that? So yeah, we take care of all that stuff, and then so that's the short form video sort of add-on, and these are pretty much brand new right off the docket. You're pretty much the first person hearing about these, Chris, because I am recooking these up. They were, when I launched in 2020, these were all exclusively like audiograms, posts, and stuff like that, but now we're mixing it up a little bit. And then I'm thinking about offering one. Now, this is another thing that we can chat about, because you get podcasters who throw the video straight onto YouTube.
Right, yeah.
And, if it's recorded on Zoom and it has the automatic kind of like detect the input level or adjust automatically,
Oh, yeah, right, yeah.
Then it can kind of normalize it and get away with it. But, sometimes you get somebody who, a client, they'll throw it straight onto YouTube, and they'll have one lady recording in an echoey room through like AirPods with a super sharp voice, and the other person will be like you with a nice radio voice recording on a nice mic. And the disparity between them, it's just like, you can't just throw that straight up onto YouTube and expect someone to listen, because it's just so jarring, the difference between the two voices and the audio quality. So I'm working on another add-on that basically what it does is I will optimize the audio and then I'll replace the audio from the video with the optimized audio. So it's a more pleasant listening experience, but I'm not editing through the whole video because
Right.
I've thought about that, but I'm never going to sleep if I do that.
So if you do it like that, do you ever get like the audio off where the timing is off from the lips to the voice and things like that? Because you have to replace the audio with the video audio with the regular audio?
Oh, that's a good question. And pretty much every time.
That's what I was kind of figuring about that. That's one thing I haven't messed too much with video. That's another nightmare, another editing nightmare, I should say. If you get in the whole on video with the podcast editing, and I know people love doing it. And that's probably why a lot of people just leave it as is. Take their Zoom file, strip the audio of that, make that the podcast. Take the whole Zoom file with its own audio straight to YouTube. But I can't imagine. I mean, just me personally, I cannot imagine that the watches, the video watch views on the video of that can't be very much.
Yeah, well, that's another thing. You and I have been talking about the audio quality side of things. But yeah, you're right. Thinking of it strategically, you really have to think of the ROI of your time, right? And your money. So if you're a client who's going to pay the podcast man to do the replacement of the audio with the optimized audio and all that groovy stuff to make it listenable as well as watchable, then that's going to cost you some money. If you're a client or a podcaster who's going to do that optimization, normalization, if you know how to do the equalization, and I sound like I'm rapping over here with all the Asians now.
It's all good.
But if you're going to do that all on your own, and then you're going to take the time to load it into YouTube and, get all the tags and everything in there, you're right. For the most part, Chris, it's a question of maybe getting a few more views per episode, unless it's a YouTube channel that already has some success or you can build up to it. But so it could be worth it because, playing devil's advocate with what I just said, YouTube is the second biggest search engine. So
right. Yeah. I always both our shows are on YouTube, but they're just like that image with the wavy lines or the whatever. Because on Libsyn, they offer it as a feature to send your podcast up there as a static image, and it's on there. And I don't know if I get any views on there because I don't even look, but it's just there. Like you said, just to use the search engine optimization, because it is the number 2 search engine in the world. So that's why it's there. It's not so people can listen to it there. It's just so it is there.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And I do have that set up for some of my clients in Libsyn. And I think with the new Libsyn, they include that right inside the stats. So you don't even have to go to YouTube to find that. If you are interested to see how many tens of thousands of listens you're getting from YouTube, Chris.
Oh, well, I used to get a bunch. I always joke about because I got into YouTube before Google bought it. I was on YouTube, and I put a video up, probably the early days of YouTube, probably when YouTube first came out. It's an old video. It's like a 13-second, 20-second clip of me riding. My dad had a desert, like miniature motorcycle out in the desert. It's a little video of me riding it around, like like a little hill, just this really, really short video. But it's got last I checked, it had like 15,000 views on it. But of course, it's been around a while, so it's. I mean, everybody loves YouTube. But the thing about audio is, I love about audio is that I've consumed more audio in my life than I've watched anything. But that's also because the nature of the business that I've been in has been a driver. And when you're a driver, the radio and podcasting, and mostly radio, is all you really have to listen to. That's why I enjoy audio so much, because you can do more things while you listen to audio.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think at the end of the day, that kind of really brings it full circle back to what, in my opinion, podcasting is for, right? It's for when you're driving, you're running, you're doing the dishes, you're working out. You can sit down and listen to a podcast and take notes from it too. That's fine. But really the accessibility of it from anywhere. And now, of course, with all these new smart cars, the podcast buttons and icons are built right into the touch screens, which is cool. So very accessible in that way. They'll probably start putting the video podcasts on the screen too. I don't know.
I've
That's
seen
probably
that,
not a great
dude.
idea.
I've seen some cars. I've seen some cars that people have. I don't know how they do this, but they take their Apple CarPlay and they got a rig to play YouTube or something on it. And I've seen them watching stuff while they're driving. It's not a safe thing to do. It's probably illegal when I think about it. But I've seen people do that too. So as far as podcast marketing goes, let's talk about that for a second. For a new show that's starting out, right? They've just launched. They got maybe 10 episodes in. What's the best way for that show to really market their show, get the word out? What do you think?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. That's like the $1 million question right there. It's being a musician too. It's the same thing the whole time. It's like, okay, I got good songs, or in this case, I have great podcast episodes. It's like, how can I get these songs or these episodes into the right? Have you heard him called this, Chris? The right earballs.
No, not yet. Thank you. Trademark, pending patent. Pending.
There you go. I can't take credit for it. I think I learned that at Podcast Movement like a couple of years ago, earballs. But so how do we get these episodes into the right earballs? And it's always easier said than done. I think a big part of it is really making genuine one-to-one connections, whether that be word of mouth. That's the one.
Yes, there you go.
I promise you, Chris, we'll get these one of these days. Yeah.
No worries.
But word of mouth is super powerful. I think people discount that a lot of times. They say, no, I need to pay Google so I can get my podcast in front of thousands of people, and then some of them will listen, and those can be good techniques too, especially when done correctly. But you can't underestimate the power of the one-to-one connections. And a lot of times it's not as much word of mouth in person. A lot of times these days it's also virtually. So you get your podcast up onto social media, and you put up the audiograms and the short form videos, the hooks from the episodes, and you kind of start grinding away. You got to make those connections kind of one by one. And then, I just think so many podcasters, and it's totally understandable. So many people think like, what difference does it make if I make a connection with one person, but those are the super fans that you can end up growing, and those connections are super powerful, because then they're going to tell someone else, and that person's going to tell someone else. And that's one way, but there's some other ways. It always cracks me up when my clients, I'm always, harping on them. You got to be a guest on other podcasts. It's so important. And then they always come back and they say, oh, Zack, I was a guest on so-and-so podcast, and like I got a bunch more followers, and my listenership went up, right? Like just a week after being on, after they aired the episode. So it's just stuff like that. Collaboration, guest swaps are really good too. So you can be on another person's podcast, and that person can be on your podcast.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. Guest swaps. That's super powerful. And then sometimes it's things you wouldn't even think of as a podcaster. Like maybe you do a guest blog post, or a guest, like a collaboration post on Instagram or something. Like, there's probably some listeners thinking, well, that's not podcasting, but it sure as heck is part of podcasting, because all these ways that we make connections are going to get more people listening to your podcast. But even more importantly, if you're a business owner or an entrepreneur listening to this, just more leads coming your way. So collaboration,
every lead counts, and every client counts, I would think,
Absolutely. And every connection definitely counts too. We can't discount that too. So I could keep rambling. Then I'll just kind of finish up my idea here with, at the same time, I don't want to forget, I'd be remiss to not mention that things like Facebook ads, Instagram ads, Google ads, and stuff like that for your podcast definitely can work too, to get more people listening to your podcast. And
but it's not kind of like the spray and pray method, where you're kind of like throwing it out there to the world, and hopefully you get throw it out to 100 different, I think 1,000 different people, and hopefully get one to listen. Yeah,
that's why I don't recommend that one at the top of the list as much as I do the smaller scale, like quote unquote smaller scale, because it one-on-one connections, because that smaller scale stuff can really snowball over time if, you get those super fans and you got to listen to this podcast, like you got to hear this episode from so-and-so. And it's super, definitely using the edutainment format, educating, entertaining. You're going to have people yelling from the rooftops about your podcast. So I agree with you that it can be kind of spray and pray. If you get someone who's like a super strategic nerd on your side as far as social media or something, they can maybe help you craft a short clip in a certain kind of way that could really hook people in. And then maybe that runs as an ad. So there's ways to do it that's not as spray and pray, but a lot of times it is rather sprayish and prayish for sure.
Well, before you start spraying everywhere and all that stuff, what you really got to have is a good podcast to start with. Now, in your opinion, Zach, what do you think makes a good podcast versus a bad podcast?
That is a great point, Chris. So kind of like I mentioned with edutainment, and if you can mix inspiration into there too. I honestly don't know how to put education, entertainment, and inspiration into one word, but we'll figure that one out for another day. But those are some key elements. I'd say you need at least probably at least two of those, in my opinion. Like, it could be educational and inspirational. It could be educational and entertaining, or I guess it could just be entertaining or educational if it's really, really strong on those points. But yeah, the content of your podcast and really just thinking about who your ideal listener is and your ideal client, really, if you're a business owner, an entrepreneur, and catering your episodes toward that ideal person, that avatar, if you will. And just thinking, okay, I have this episode topic in mind, that episode topic in mind. Would this benefit my ideal listener? And something that I learned recently that was really cool was everybody always says lead with value, which I think is super important. But what did I learn? Let's see if my brain is turned on. It's almost the weekend, man. So
yeah,
it was lead with connection. So value is important. But just imagine if you're really connecting, if you are in the shoes of your listener and you're saying, you and I, we could really connect with people by saying, and it's true, saying things like, hey, it's hard to be a podcaster. You can't be spending 5-6 hours a week messing around trying to edit your podcast. You just don't have time for that type of stuff, So really getting into their shoes and connecting on an emotional level, because then that entrepreneur is going to say, oh man, I really do need your help, Chris. Like, I shouldn't be editing my podcast and I don't even know what the heck I'm doing, So
none of us really do. We just wing it, what I'm saying?
You and I just have some prettier tools to work with.
Yeah, that could be it too. Speaking of that, I know I just put a post out on Twitter yesterday. I said how a $25 microphone can be just as successful as a show with a $500 microphone. And people are coming out of the woodwork, either agreeing or saying their comments and things of that sort. But because when it comes down to it, you have to have really engaging content told in a really engaging way. And of course, you still have to make it sound decent and good. Well, I mean, I like to sound good, but it doesn't need to sound like THX, full on the highest quality, of anything, audiophile quality here. We're talking about a podcast. But it does help if it does sound better than somebody who recorded it with a Blue Yeti in the next room, echo, it does help,
yeah. Yeah, I think I saw that post of yours, and I totally agree with you. And listener, I'm talking to the listener now, and by the way, there's another tip. We're supposed to be talking to one listener, not the many listeners, right, Chris?
Of course, there's only one listening. Thanks, Joe. Thanks for listening, by the way. I appreciate it.
Wait, Chris. It wasn't supposed to be literally one person's name. Oh man, that's funny.
Joe, you didn't mean it. I'm sorry.
But yeah, I completely agreed with that post. I think it's kind of that walking that line, right, where the content is king, but at the same time, you need to have at least a certain level of audio quality first, like tier 1 to at least be listenable, because obviously if there's like a baby crying or something the whole time, or it's like recorded in a tin can, there's some issues there, but people are pretty forgiving if the content is good. But you do want help with that audio quality to at least, and we might even talk about this, Chris, but you've probably talked about it on other episodes, that it's really not too complex to get like a Samsung Q2U USB mic and like plug it in and make sure you're speaking into it correctly, and then you're set and you can upgrade as you go. But yeah, the content is king and audio quality. And this is coming from two production heavy dudes telling you this right now, that the content is king and the audio quality, it doesn't have to sound like it's coming from a radio booth, but as long as you got a good dynamic mic, you can pop that bad boy right in USB and you're rolling.
Well, that's the thing, is I see people like saying, I know what's going to make my show successful. I know what's going to take it. I need another $1,000 microphone. That's what I need. Yeah. No, forget the fact that your content sucks. No, don't worry about that. No, I'm going to spend $1,000 on equipment. That's what I need. Yeah, for sure. And then they pod fade and they're pissed off because they spent all this money on junk and then they're selling it or who knows what. It goes in the closet. I don't know.
Yeah, closet fade. Yeah, right. That's what happens to the equipment.
Right. So a little while ago, I upgraded to, because I've always wanted a Rodecaster, and I never bought the version 1. I jumped over that, went straight to the version 2, which I'm using today, and I love the thing. It's here. It's got bells and whistles, and I haven't got too much into the weeds of what it does. I know like the basics and stuff, So, it works for us, works for me. I can record on it and do things with it and stuff. And it's a fun little toy. And I know you don't need to buy one of these to podcast. You can start off, like I say, with a Q2U plugged right into your laptop and you're ready to roll. So, Zach, I know that you do some podcast editing. That's your whole thing's about. So what is your workflow like for like a client? How does it work and what do you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So, where shall we begin?
Okay, so pretend I'm a new podcaster. I record into something on my end. Now, what would I record into? Say I don't know nothing about nothing. So what would you tell me to record into?
Yeah. So we're talking strictly about the editing and recording side of things. So, of course, I have guides for all this stuff to help along the way. Otherwise, it becomes a lot of saying the same thing, which is why we also record podcast episodes, right?
Yeah, go listen to episode whatever it was. Yeah.
I really say if it's a solo episode or a local recording, then and you're a solo podcaster, you just plug your USB mic in pretty much, and you're off to the races. You could use, if you're on a Windows or like a PC, you could use Audacity. If you're on a Mac, GarageBand, they're definitely great programs. You could use like QuickTime Recorder on anything, but then you can't really see the progress of the recording and like it's not as visual with the clipping and stuff. So I like I like to Audacity or GarageBand and just making sure that the levels are correct and the mic. And like we talked about before we started recording, the mic technique is so important because how many times have we seen someone speaking into a Blue Yeti as if it were a dynamic mic, like into the top of it?
Oh, yeah. So many clips on that. I told the girl like a couple of days ago on LinkedIn, she did this whole cute little video, cute back. It's all about the visual with her. It's all visual. I look pretty. The background looks pretty. Everything looks pretty. The Blue Yeti, I kid you not, was facing the wrong way with the Blue Yeti facing away from her, and she was pointing it to her like a tip, like you said. I'm like, I wrote back, that microphone's pointing the wrong way, right? Oh my gosh, thanks for telling me that. But I mean,
that was nice of you. Was she using it to record, or
I think so. It's all part of her like podcast video. She does the whole video clip thing and the video podcast thing and the podcast thing. I just ran into her on LinkedIn and I just mentioned that. So, but anyways, back to you, Zach.
Yeah, no worries. That's a super relevant example because the mic technique is really important, and it's actually a little different. I just whistled like an old man. Actually,
oh, it's all good.
I'll let you ease that up in the post-production, Chris.
I'll work on it. We'll see.
So I actually have some clients who I've had to guide them in different mic techniques depending on the quality of their voice, So I'll have a female podcaster with actually a pretty rich, full voice. And I say, hey, it's sounding almost a little too boomy. Let's actually move the mic a tiny bit further from your face, which is almost never what we say. We're almost always begging people to get closer to the mic, right?
Right, of course.
But in this case, yeah, she backed off a little bit, and lo and behold, her voice sounded more balanced and natural because she wasn't like super close to the mic and getting that boomy, like low voice sound. Where with guys, depending, especially if we want to have like more of a rich, like radio production sounding voice, we can get closer to the mic. So it can even be like a quality of your voice type of thing. So it's just kind of testing in different ways in that sense. But the actual editing, so
you get the files from them somehow, right? So they drop, is it like a Dropbox or something, or how do you actually get the files?
Oh, that's a good question. And this is a San Diego company, man. I swear by ClickUp. Have you heard of them?
I think so. I think I've seen their logo somewhere.
Yeah, you probably have seen it on the city buses and stuff, or some billboards.
Yeah, that's probably where I've seen it. I know it sounds familiar. I just don't know what it does.
Yeah, so ClickUp is basically, it's pretty similar, I would imagine. I haven't used these other ones as much, but I'd imagine it's pretty similar to like Monday.com or these different types of like project management systems.
Okay. And
it's kind of similar to Asana, which I have used too. But ClickUp, man, I have it all just, and this took me, the pandemic hit and I was sitting there like, okay, let's get this bad boy organized. And because I was doing what I call the email soup before with my clients.
I gotcha.
And let me tell you, that soup does not taste good when there's too many ingredients in it, man.
Okay, gotcha.
So I said, I need some type of system going on. So now everything is just beautifully organized inside ClickUp. Every time a client needs to send over an episode, they submit a form with the files. If there's any specific edits, anything I should know about it, the episode number, is it explicit? All that type of information they send my way. And although sometimes they say it's not explicit when it is, they're trying to pull a fast one or something. But
oh wow, okay. So you get the files, and then what do you? Now I'm assuming mostly audio files, but so you read audio stuff. What do you do with that file?
Yeah, so I plop those files right into Logic Pro, which is this, but I'm just talking to the listener out there. It's GarageBand's big brother.
Ooh.
Yeah, Logic Pro. So it just has some nicer features such as like crossfading between audio clips and stuff like that, with really nice features, and speeding up the audio so I can edit faster, which is nice too.
Oh, so you have to listen to it as you listen through it. You speed play it while you listen to it. Is that what you do?
Yeah. So the first thing I do after plopping the files in is I go through and I kind of visually edit, right? So I go through and I'm looking for things such as crosstalk and overlapping that may be not as pleasing to the listener if both people are talking, three people are talking, and then I'm looking for weird clicks and ticks and stuff, and maybe this chair was making noise, or just kind of unwanted noise. And the cool thing is, and this is a nice tip for maybe if there's any DIYers out there who want to dare to get their feet into this type of thing, it's really nice if you have those separate audio files for each speaker, because then let's say if I had a dog, let's say my dog started barking while Chris was talking, he could take out my dog's barking noise while he's talking because we're on separate tracks. So
right, yeah.
I go through. Yeah.
Do you get a lot of separate tracks come in, or are they all single tracks?
That is one thing that I am pretty adamant about with my clients. Like, get me those separate tracks, please, because some of them will send me one track for 2 or 3 participants, and I'll say, okay, like that's how you sent it. I'll do my best. And, but if, for the most part, my clients are trained,
Okay, good.
if you will, to send separate tracks. And it really helps because not only can I do that visual editing, like I was mentioning, but then I can also do specific optimization. So you and I don't have to do too much between our voices because we're both pretty much like baritone voice range, but let's imagine you have one person with a high tinny voice. Maybe she was recording in like a big empty room, and and then you have another person with Chris's setup who has a nice echo-free situation with a nice mic technique and a nice mic and everything. So I am going to have to try and balance out these 2 audios, right? So then it's more pleasing. There's not as much of like a disparity between Chris's voice and the other person's voice. So that part, the optimization and the visual editing takes a while, and I do that, and then I actually bounce or export the tracks into one. And at this point, and this is kind of controversial, maybe, I don't know, but some editors wait until after to do this, but I like to do this at this point. So then when I'm editing through, I can hear exactly what it's going to sound like when I am done with the files. Is what I do is at this point, I run it through Isotope. There's some different plugins there, the RX8 editor. So I'll run it through sometimes like the mouth declicker, if it's a voice that has a lot of mouth smacking noises and ticks and stuff going on.
Okay.
And yeah, sometimes I'll run it through the de-reverber.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, it's just kind of like we were talking about before. It can't turn terrible into
gold,
beautiful, into gold, but it can turn like somewhat of a level of reverb and unwanted room noise into a pretty nice studio sounding voice. And then, Chris, this is hot off the press, man. I just started playing with this like literally 2 days ago, and we may open a new can of worms. I don't know if you want to talk about it now or a little bit later.
What is it? What you got?
Have you played with the Adobe Podcast Enhance Speech thingamajiggy yet?
Is it only available in Adobe Audition?
It is an online thing. I could send you the link. You could use it right now. It's free so far, but I suppose they'll probably charge for it.
What's it do?
So here's the thing. It does everything. And
okay, everything says it does everything. So what does it do? They all say that,
It does everything. Yeah, I know, right?
Does it like edit your show for you and take all kinds of, is it like the script or what?
No, this is purely audio optimization. So what it does is you pop the audio in there, the raw audio, and what it does is it does some of the things that I just mentioned, like it'll get rid of the mouth noises, it'll get rid of the reverb, it really warms up the voices so it sounds kind of like a radio studio type of voice. And I'm pretty sure it is progressive, I guess you could say, because I believe it adapts as it's listening through. So it doesn't just set, from what I can hear back at least, I don't think it just sets like, it does like a set it and forget it type of equalization. I think it's actually listening through.
Like an AI enhanced?
Yeah, it's all AI, and I think it's listening through, and I think it's getting rid of these unpleasing frequencies throughout, because it takes away the harshness, the sharpness. It adds some warmth. I don't know. It's really impressive, but there's always a big but. And if we must be about the same age, just like that song. I like big butts and I cannot lie.
Oh, yeah.
Is that, you knew where I was going?
Right.
But I don't like this big butt, because the but is that sometimes it's so smart that it maybe outdoes itself. And I can kind of hear where it starts to sound a little bit artificially sometimes.
Oh, is it too quick? Does it give it kind of more like that robotic kind of sound? You know what I'm saying?
Barely. I'm really impressed that it almost doesn't at all, because I know exactly what you're talking about. And I've had problems with that with other plugins and stuff. Like, it just can't handle breathing, stuff like that, because the noise gate thing is just, it doesn't know what it's doing. But this thing is super impressive, but it does have issues with some things. Like if you get a guest on that has this kind of voice, let me do it. Hey, how's it going? That type of voice where it kind of has, and you can probably Chris, you can probably visualize kind of the sound wave from that, how it has all those little points to it, yeah.
Well, I also noticed
that type of thing.
If they come on a different kind of microphone, that it's like if they have those headsets, those headset microphones where it's like the phone call headset kind of deal. Those have those are spiky little they have no bass. It's all high pitch.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see what this enhanced speech from Adobe does with it. But my point is, sometimes it just can't handle some things. Like that type of voice, it doesn't know what to do always with it, because it messes with the noise gate or something, so it kind of skips a little bit if it's
yeah. Gotta chop it up, chop little spaces. It chops up some of the vocals.
Yeah, it can get a little weird, but that's really honestly 0.1% of what I heard back. So it's really impressive. So yeah, I would say that's one thing. I don't necessarily think that this thing is going to take our jobs per se, Chris, because it has some work to do. And obviously it's not going to edit the episode for the person. But if you're a DIY podcaster, you may consider checking that out. I think some of the issues it has, people that aren't as picky as you and I, Chris, they maybe wouldn't even notice.
Right. Yeah.
So, we've heard so much audio, and we can hear the difference between a compressed, chunky MP3 and a wave, stuff like that. Whereas if I asked my wife that, she just likes to listen to the episode. She can't hear the difference between that stuff,
Right. So do your clients send you MP3s or WAV files?
I try to be pretty adamant about that too. So usually WAV. Sometimes it's also the video formats, and
MP4?
I just convert it. Yeah.
Or whatever. MP4A. What's the one that Zoom sends? M4A? M4A, right?
I think they send MP4 actually, but something else sends the other one you said. What was it? MVA or something? M4V or something. Yeah. Yeah. And then sometimes I get MP3s too, and I just, it's not too much of an issue as long as I'm not doing a bunch of more compressing and stuff on my end, which I do the minimum of compression and all that stuff. But that's kind of another can of worms. You can't load a wave into, you might be able to actually, I don't know, but I don't think you can load a wave into Libsyn, because then it's going to take forever for it to load on the listener's device.
Don't they convert it for you anyways? I think they do it on Libsyn. I think some of them do. They'll convert it into MP3s if it's not.
Yeah.
I'm not, and I do believe, I think Spotify, maybe Anchor, because they're attached. I think they have to take it as an MP3. They won't even play anything else that's not.
Buzzsprout does. Mm-hmm.
And as far as podcast hosting goes, I know everybody has their favorites, and a lot of people switch to different hosts and different things. And in my opinion, I think they're all kind of the same. Really, I mean, as long as they get the job done, as long as when I upload it here, it comes on my Apple Podcast there. Did it do that? Yes, great. Okay, good job. That's basically the best you can ask for when it comes to a podcast host, really. And I know everyone's saying about, oh, this one gives you the IAB certified stats, and this one doesn't, and blah, 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 and all this stuff. So I had a podcaster, I'm not going to mention names, but I got me an idea thinking about this, is that I know if you're on social media and you follow a lot of different podcast shows, a lot of them will kind of share their stats and say, oh, we just hit 10,000 plays. We just hit 10 million plays. We just hit blah, 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 whatever. Even with the screenshots and all that, how can you tell if a podcaster that posts something like that, how can you tell if they're not lying or not?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, let me tell you right away, if it's an ad agency, they're going to be able to tell if you're trying to pull a fast one on them. So don't do that for sure.
Oh, so you're telling an ad agency, my podcast has 10 million downloads, and they like what do they have tools to figure that out or what?
Yeah, I think they can they'll look into the IAB stats for sure on your podcast. But one quick one that I kind of like, it's kind of fun, is listennotes.com.
Yeah, I've mentioned them. I've used them. It's not an exact science, but it's pretty close.
Yeah. I've heard it's, pretty accurate. And that way you can, if somebody's boasting like extreme numbers and you go and look and it says they're only in the top, which is also good. I'm not saying it's not, but if it says they're only in the top 10% of podcasts globally, but they're saying they have like 20 million downloads or something, then you'll know something is a little bit fishy there,
Right. And also, if you look at their social media and they have only 500 followers on Instagram and maybe 1,000 followers on Twitter and maybe, whatever, you're like, it doesn't seem to add up quite right, So something's not right. But I'm just wondering if there's a tool out there to where you can kind of like figure out, like click a tool and then it'll tell you kind of an idea of how many plays they get on certain apps or certain platforms. I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think there are, of course, if it's your own podcast, you can check all that stuff, in your host, or you can go to Apple Podcasts Connect or like Spotify for podcasters, stuff like that. I don't know if you can kind of check out other people's podcasts. You could go to Chartable if they're saying like, I'm on this chart and that chart, and and then you could go and check on Chartable. You could see there. Yeah, I'm sure there is a way though. It's probably kind of that deal where it's like, you want to figure out, is this person you just met who you might hire, are they
right?
have they gone to jail or have they done this or that?
I was thinking that. So I was thinking more along the lines of like, if they say, my show gets, say, 50,000 downloads per episode a week, and so I'm going to charge you as a guest to come on because I'm 50,000, and I say, okay, we'll prove it, And if they try to just take a screenshot of some random number they just Googled up on Google Images of a 50,000 number, here it is. And you're like, okay.
Yeah, things that make you go, huh.
So you're going to charge me $300 to be on your show because you say you got 50,000 downloads or whatever it is. I think I need more proof than that. And then even with the screenshots of their social, like say their screenshots of their podcast app or whatever they get their charts from, their host or whatever, you kind of still kind of question that stuff. So I was kind of wondering if there was a way, like a way you can see from the outside and figure that out kind of roughly. I know with Listen Notes kind of gives you an idea, but I did hear recently, I think Listen Notes, a lot of their data comes from, like, believe it or not, like ratings and reviews. So the more ratings and reviews you have, the more of a higher ranking you get on the Listen Notes.
Yeah, that could be. I know that in the actual, from what I've heard in the algorithm of Apple Podcasts, at least, I know they base a lot of that on the actual follows, as opposed to like listens. So if you get a bunch more followers, then that's really going to help boost you in the algorithm even more so than like listeners and that's interesting that you say that with Listen Notes with the ratings and reviews, because I've heard with the Apple Podcasts app that they don't care too much about the ratings and reviews on that specific one. So it's kind of like they're all pulling different kind of metrics and different ways of validating and seeing what is quote unquote success of a podcast, which, geez, we could have like a part 2 of this, like what is success in a podcast, right?
Well, I think successful, it means something different for everybody, but some people swear by the numbers. If my podcast gets, 1 million downloads, it means successful. I think if people take, if you're a listener listening to this, thanks, Joe, by the way, if he's listening to this and he gets value from this episode and he puts into practice and he creates a better show for himself, and enjoys this, and that's value to me too. Just one person, just make a difference with one person makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So that's like just thinking back to the why of your podcast is like you just did is I think much more important than the numbers. And so you can think of your goal of your podcast both as what kind of value is it going to provide, and then if you do want to get a little less romantic about it, I guess you could also say like, all right, is this bad boy driving leads? Because there's some creators. I have a host, a client who she's in the top 1.5 of podcasts. She has just a really great show, but to this point, she hasn't figured out any way to monetize it because all she's wanted to do so far is just provide excellent value. And I think she's definitely done that. Like she's changed a lot of people's lives. So I think, if you're an entrepreneur, remembering both of those things, and if you're a hobbyist, having fun, connecting with people, it just depends exactly like you say, Chris. I totally agree. It means something different for everybody, but does it ever really mean like just getting to a certain number or something? Because what does that mean other than being a number in and of itself, right?
Right, exactly. It's just bragging rights, really. So you can put it up on social media and look what I just hit, 1 million downloads. Check me out, everybody. Congratulations to me. Check me out. That's what it's all really about, So, well, Zack, this has been so much fun having you on Podtastic Audio today, man. I really appreciate you stopping by. Where can everybody find out all about you and all your wonderful services and all your stuff?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me on, Chris. And I knew we'd be just rolling with the punches. I thought, man, we are going to have a good conversation because I listened to a few of your other episodes and saw what you have going on, and I was like, oh, I'm never going to stop talking with this guy, probably.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks, man. I was thinking about this earlier today because I haven't been on a podcast in a while, and I was thinking, you know what? I have to say to other podcasters out there, this is a moment of do as I say, not as I do, because I always just simply send people, I say, hey, you want to connect? You want to know about what I do? Just go to my website, thepodcastman.com. But if I were thinking as a business, I would have probably just a quick little tip. I'd probably have like a lead magnet or an opt-in to send people to. I would have maybe a newsletter, maybe something like that. So those are just tips for podcasters out there. Do those things, and maybe I'll do those things someday too.
Right. There's only so many hours in a day. Last time I checked, there's only 24 of them. So I got 24 books. So maybe we'll figure it out sometime.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
Well, this has been so great, man. Zack, you have yourself a wonderful rest of your day. Stay dry out there. I know it's wet, and enjoy your weekend.
Yeah, you too, buddy. Thanks again.